My name is Laura. I am 36 years old, and I live in a quiet apartment in the city. It happened at exactly 4:15 p.m. That was the minute my family finally broke me. We were gathered in the dining room of the old lake cabin. It was supposed to be a celebration, but for me, these gatherings were always a test of endurance. My 6-year-old son, Jacob, sat at the table. He was smiling, looking down at the watercolor painting he had just finished. He was so proud. Then my sister Jessica leaned over. She didn't stumble. She didn't slip. She looked right at me with a cold smirk and tilted her glass. Thick red wine poured directly onto Jacob's painting. The paper soaked it up instantly, ruining the colors. I waited for the gasp. I waited for my mother to scold her. Instead, the room erupted in laughter. My uncles, my cousins, and even my mother threw their heads back. They were laughing at a child's devastation. Jacob didn't cry. He just froze and started to shake, trying to disappear into his chair. In his terror, I saw my own childhood staring back at me. They were teaching him that his pain was a joke. And in that second, the fearful daughter inside me died, and a furious mother was born. But before I tell you how everything flipped and subscribe, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? My name is Laura. I am 36 years old. I looked at my son. That is the only thing I could do in that moment. The world around me had dissolved into a blur of noise and motion, but Jacob was crystal clear. He was the only thing in the room that was real to me. He was 6 years old. He was small for his age, with messy brown hair that always seemed to stick up in the back no matter how much I combed it. He had eyes that were usually wide with curiosity, eager to see everything, eager to show you what he had found. But right now, his eyes weren't wide. They were squeezed shut. The red wine was still spreading. I watched it move across the table's surface like a dark, living thing. It soaked into the thick, white watercolor paper of his painting. He had spent 2 hours on that painting. We had brought his art supplies specifically for this trip. I had told him, "Grandpa loves birds. Why don't you paint him the blue jay we saw at the feeder?" He had taken the task so seriously. He had stuck his tongue out the corner of his mouth while he mixed the blue and the white to get the color of the feathers just right. He had told me, "Mom, look, I made the feathers look real." He was so proud. He thought he was contributing. He thought he was giving a gift. Now the blue bird was gone. It was just a dark, purple bruise on the paper. The wine had erased his hard work in less than a second. Jacob didn't scream. He didn't cry out. That was the part that broke my heart the most. That was the part that made my stomach turn over with a sick, heavy dread. Most 6-year-olds would scream if someone poured a drink on their art. They would throw a tantrum. They would stand up and shout, "Hey, you ruined it." They would look at their mother and demand that she fix it. They would demand an apology. They would act like children who believe the world is fair. Jacob did none of those things. He sat very still. He was so still he looked like a statue. His hands were in his lap, hidden under the edge of the table. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were clenched into tight little fists. I saw the tension traveling up his small arms. I saw his shoulders hunching up toward his ears. He was curling his chest inward, collapsing his ribcage. It was a physical transformation. One moment he was a happy boy occupying his space at the table. The next moment, he was trying to fold himself into a tiny box where no one could see him. He was trying to disappear. I stared at him, and time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail. I saw the way his skin seemed to pale, the color draining out of his cheeks until he looked sickly and gray. I saw his lower lip trembling. He caught it between his teeth. He bit down on it. He bit it so hard I was afraid it would bleed. He was using the physical pain of biting his lip to distract himself from the emotional pain of the humiliation. He was locking it in. He was swallowing the scream. I knew that posture. I knew it better than I knew my own face in the mirror. I had sat exactly like that at this very same dining table 20 years ago. I had sat like that 100 times. A memory flashed in my mind, violent and bright. I was 10 years old. It was Thanksgiving. The table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates that we were never allowed to touch. I was wearing a new dress. It was velvet, a deep green. I felt pretty in it. I felt special. Jessica had been 14 then. She was angry that day because she hadn't been allowed to go to a friend's party. She was looking for a target. She found me. She had accidentally knocked my full plate of food onto the floor. The china shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in the dining room. The turkey, the gravy, the cranberry sauce, it all splattered over my legs. It ruined the green velvet dress. I remembered the heat of the gravy burning my skin, But mostly I remembered the laughter. The room had laughed then, too. My uncles had chuckled. My cousins had pointed. And my mother had sighed. She had looked at me with exhaustion, as if I had done it on purpose to annoy her. "Oh, look at the mess you made," she had said. "Why are you always so clumsy? Go change, you're ruining dinner." I hadn't knocked the plate. Jessica had shoved it, but the truth didn't matter. The narrative was that I was the clumsy one, the problem child, the one who made messes. I remembered curling up in my chair before I ran to my room. I remembered biting my lip. I remembered wishing, with every ounce of my soul, that I could turn invisible. I wanted to melt into the floorboards. I wanted to stop existing, because existing meant being a target. Now I was watching my son do the exact same thing. It felt like a physical blow. It felt like someone had taken a sharp knife and slid it right between my ribs, twisting it slowly. I wasn't just watching him. I was watching the cycle repeat itself. It was happening in real time. I looked at the top of his head. He was looking down at his lap, refusing to look at the painting, refusing to look at his aunt. I realized then that trauma isn't just a memory. It isn't just something that lives in the past. It is something you inherit, like eye color or height. It is a family heirloom that gets passed down, heavy and poisonous. I had tried so hard to protect him. I had moved away. I lived in a different city, 3 hours away. I limited our visits to holidays and birthdays. I read all the parenting books. I taught him to be kind. I taught him to speak up for himself. I told him his feelings mattered. But we were here, in this house, for less than 3 hours, and already he was learning the lesson I had spent my whole life trying to unlearn. He was learning that his feelings didn't matter. He was learning that when someone hurts you, the adults who are supposed to protect you will just laugh. He was learning that the truth doesn't matter, only the power dynamic matters. He was learning that hiding is safer than crying. The laughter around the table was starting to die down, settling into little chuckles and snickers. It was the sound of a group of people who were comfortable with cruelty. They didn't see a boy in pain. They saw a slapstick comedy moment. They saw a mess. But the silence coming from my son was the loudest thing in the room. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. It pressed against my ears. I watched a single tear leak out from his squeezed-shut eyelid. It was shiny and round. It rolled slowly down his cheek, tracking through the dust he had picked up playing outside earlier. He felt it. He reacted instantly. He quickly wiped it away with his shoulder, moving his head in a sharp, jerky motion. He was terrified that someone would see it. He knew, instinctively, that if they saw him cry, they would laugh harder. He knew that tears were blood in the water for sharks like my sister. He was ashamed. That was the worst part. He was ashamed that his aunt had ruined his painting. He thought it was his fault. He thought he shouldn't have had his painting on the table. He thought he was stupid for trying to show it off. Victims always think it is their fault. We are trained to think that way. We are trained to look inward for the blame, because the world refuses to blame the aggressor. I looked at his trembling chin. It was so small. It was the chin of a baby, really. He was still a baby. I thought about all the times I had held him when he had a nightmare. I thought about the times I had put a band-aid on his knee and told him, "You're safe. Mommy's got you." I had lied. I was a liar. I had brought him here. I had driven the car. I had walked him through the front door. I had brought him into the lion's den because I wanted to be a good daughter. I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted my parents to love me. I had sacrificed my son's safety for my own need to be accepted by these people. I looked at his small, defenseless back. He looked so lonely. He was surrounded by family, his grandmother, his grandfather, his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, and he was completely, utterly alone. The realization hit me cold and hard. It settled in my bones like ice water. I was letting this happen. By staying seated, I was complicit. By staying silent, I was agreeing with them. I was letting them teach him to be a victim. I was letting them break his spirit just like they had broken mine. If I didn't do something right now, in this exact second, this moment would become a cornerstone of his personality. He would remember this forever. He would become the boy who takes it. He would become the man who apologizes when someone else hits him. I looked at my hands resting on the tablecloth. They were my hands, but they looked strange. They looked like the hands of a woman who was afraid. I didn't want to be that woman anymore. I felt a change inside me. It wasn't a hot flash of anger. It wasn't a scream building in my throat. It was something colder. It was something heavier. It was a solid weight settling in my stomach. It was the death of hope. For years, I had hoped they would change. I had hoped Jessica would grow up. I had hoped my mother would finally see me. I had hoped that if I was just nice enough, quiet enough, successful enough, they would treat me with respect. I looked at Jessica's smirk. I looked at the wine dripping onto the floor. They were never going to change. This was who they were. They were people who broke things and laughed, and I was done being the glue. I looked at Jacob one last time, memorizing the pain on his face. I needed to remember it. I needed to burn that image into my mind so I would never, ever back down again. I needed to see his humiliation so I could find the strength to cause a scene. We are taught that causing a scene is bad. We are taught that making people uncomfortable is the worst sin a woman can commit. But looking at my son, I realized there was a worse sin. The worst sin is letting your child believe he deserves to be treated like garbage. I took a deep breath. I could smell the wine. It smelled sour. I could smell the roast beef my mother had cooked. It smelled heavy and greasy. I placed my feet flat on the floor. I felt the solid wood beneath my soles. I engaged the muscles in my legs. I was going to stand up. And when I stood up, I was going to burn this whole false piece to the ground. The boy hiding in the chair needed a hero. He didn't need a polite mother. He didn't need a peacekeeper. He needed a warrior. I looked at the back of his neck, so vulnerable and exposed. I see you, Jacob, I thought. I see you hiding. But you don't have to hide anymore. Because I am about to make sure everyone in this room sees you. The silence in my head ended. The noise of the room faded away. There was only me, my son, and the enemy across the table. I prepared to move. The wine was dripping off the edge of the table now. Drip, drip, drip. It landed on the hardwood floor. That sound seemed to snap my mother, Susan, into action. But she didn't move toward Jacob. She didn't reach out to hug her grandson. She didn't turn to Jessica to scold her. She grabbed a stack of napkins. Oh dear, my mother chirped. Her voice was bright and fake. It was the voice she used when guests were over and she wanted to pretend everything was perfect. What a mess. Let's get this cleaned up. She rushed over to the table and started dabbing frantically at the wine puddle. She was wiping the table, not the tears on my son's face. It was just an accident, my mother said loudly. She looked around the table, making eye contact with everyone, daring them to disagree. Just a silly accident. Jessica didn't mean it. The glass just slipped. Didn't it, Jess? She was rewriting history while it was still happening. We all saw Jessica pour it. We all saw the smirk. But my mother was painting over the truth, just like she was wiping up the wine. Jessica sat back in her chair. She looked relaxed. She held her empty wine glass loosely in her hand. She didn't look sorry, she looked satisfied. Oops, Jessica said. She didn't even try to sound sincere. She grinned, a tight, cruel curving of her lips. I guess I'm just clumsy today. The kid shouldn't have had his toys on the dinner table anyway. It wasn't a toy, it was a gift for his grandfather, but that didn't matter to her. See, my mother said, scrubbing a stain on the wood. She feels terrible, it's fine. Jacob, honey, don't worry. We can get you more paper later, don't make a fuss. Don't make a fuss. That was the family motto. That was the rule that ruled our lives. You can be hurt, you can be bleeding, you can be humiliated, but you must never make a fuss. I looked around the table at the others. My Uncle Bob was chewing on a roll, looking at his plate. My cousin Sarah was checking her phone. My Aunt Linda gave a nervous little laugh and took a sip of her water. They all knew. They knew Jessica did it on purpose. Jessica had been doing things like this for 30 years. She would pinch me under the table until I cried, then claim I was crazy. She would steal money from my mother's purse and blame me. She would spread rumors about me to my friends. Everyone knew, but no one said a word. Why? Because it was easier. If they confronted Jessica, she would scream. She would throw things. She would ruin the weekend. She would make their lives miserable. Jessica was a terrorist, and my family held the rest of us hostage to keep her happy. So they sacrificed me. And now, they were sacrificing Jacob. They chose the bully over the victim because the bully was loud and the victim was quiet. They wanted a nice dinner. They wanted to pretend we were a happy family. If the price of that happy dinner was my son's self-esteem, they were willing to pay it. It's just a painting, Uncle Bob mumbled, trying to be helpful. He can paint another one. Exactly, my mother said, relieved. She bundled up the wet, wine-soaked napkins. All gone, no harm done. Let's serve the cake. She turned to the sideboard to get the cake knife. She was humming. She actually started humming. She thought she had fixed it. She thought she had smoothed it over just like she always did. I looked at Jessica. She was pouring herself more wine from the bottle on the table. She caught my eye and winked. It was a challenge. She was telling me I can do whatever I want and Mom will always protect me. You can't touch me. She was right. She had always been right. She was the golden child, the one who needed extra help, the one who was sensitive. I was just the other one. The strong one, the one who could take it. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a mother. I felt the air in the room get heavy. My heart was beating slow and hard against my ribs. I looked at my mother's back as she cut the cake. I looked at my relatives looking at the floor. I looked at Jessica's smirk. They had built a peace based on my silence. They had built a comfortable life by standing on my neck. I looked at Jacob. He was still staring at his ruined painting. He touched the wet paper with one finger. The piece was over. I stood up. I didn't do it quickly. I didn't jump up. I moved slowly, deliberately. The legs of my heavy wooden chair scraped against the floor. Scraap. It was a harsh, ugly sound. It cut right through the chatter and the clinking of silverware. The noise was loud enough that everyone stopped. My mother froze with the cake knife in midair. Uncle Bob stopped chewing. I stepped away from my chair. I walked around the corner of the table. My steps were steady. I could feel the floorboards solid under my feet. I walked until I was standing directly between Jessica and Jacob. I turned my back to my son. I became a wall. Jessica could no longer see him. She could only see me. I placed my hands flat on the table. I leaned forward slightly. The room was deadly silent. You could hear the rain tapping against the window. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Jessica looked up at me. For a second, she looked surprised. Usually, I would be crying by now. Usually, I would be running to the bathroom to hide. Or I would be helping Mom clean up, apologizing for existing. But I wasn't crying. My face was dry. My hands were not shaking. "That's enough," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It wasn't loud. I didn't yell. It was flat. It was low. It was terrifyingly calm. It sounded like a stranger's voice. "Oh, come on, sis." Jessica rolled her eyes. She tried to laugh, but it sounded brittle. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a stupid drawing." I said I was sorry. "No, you didn't," I said. "You said oops." You smiled, and you aren't sorry. "Geez, you're sensitive," Jessica scoffed. She looked at our mother. "Mom, tell her to sit down. She's ruining the vibe." My mother turned around, looking anxious. "Honey, please, sit down. Let's just have cake. It's your father's birthday." "No," I said to my mother without looking at her. My eyes stayed locked on Jessica. "I am not sitting down," I continued. "And we are not having cake." "What is wrong with you?" Jessica snapped. Her face was starting to get red. She didn't like being challenged. "You think you're better than me. You come here with your perfect kid and your perfect job and you judge me." "I don't judge you, Jessica," I said. "I survive you, but I am done surviving." I picked up the bottle of wine from the table. It was the expensive bottle my husband and I had brought as a gift. It was still half full. Jessica's eyes went wide. She flinched, pulling back. She thought I was going to hit her. She thought I was going to pour it on her. I didn't. I wasn't her. I set the bottle down on the other side of the table, out of her reach. "You are a bully," I said. I spoke the words clearly, like I was stating a fact about the weather. "You are 40 years old and you get pleasure from hurting a 6-year-old boy. You are cruel and you are small." "Shut up." Jessica slammed her hand on the table. "No," I said. "I have been shutting up for 30 years. I shut up when you cut my hair while I was sleeping. I shut up when you stole my college fund. I shut up when you ruined my wedding reception." I took a breath. The air felt clean in my lungs. "I kept the peace," I said. "I thought if I was quiet enough, if I was good enough, you would stop. But you never stop. You just find new people to hurt. And today you picked the wrong person." My mother rushed forward. "Stop it, both of you. This is a family." I turned my head slowly to look at my mother. "No, Mom," I said. "This isn't a family. This is a hostage situation, and you are the one holding the keys." My mother gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She looked like I had slapped her. I turned back to Jessica. She was seething, her mouth opening and closing, looking for a weapon, looking for something to say that would hurt me. She was scanning my face for a weakness. She couldn't find one. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was power, not the loud, explosive power of anger, but the quiet, unshakable power of the truth. I had nothing left to lose. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. She was just a sad, mean woman with wine stains on her teeth. "You will never speak to my son again," I said. "You will never look at him. You will never be in the same room as him. This is the last time you ever see us." "Good," Jessica screamed. "Get out, no one wants you here anyway, right, Dad?" She looked past me toward the head of the table. She looked for her ultimate protector, our father. "Dad, tell her to get out," Jessica demanded. We all turned to look at the end of the table. My father, David, was a quiet man. He was big, with broad shoulders from years of working construction, though now he was retired and his back was bent. He had spent his life working hard, paying bills, and staying out of the arguments. For as long as I could remember, he had practiced avoidance. When Jessica screamed, he went to the garage. When my mother cried, he went for a drive. He was a good man, but he was a passive man. He let my mother run the emotional side of the house. He let her enable Jessica because he didn't want to fight the war. He had been sitting silently through all of this. He hadn't laughed when the wine spilled, but he hadn't helped either. He had just stared at his plate, his face gray and tired. Now he stood up. He moved heavily, like he was carrying 100 pounds of concrete on his back. He didn't look at Jessica. He didn't look at me. He walked over to the kitchen sink. The room was silent again, watching him. We didn't know what he was doing. He reached for the bottle of yellow dish soap. He squirted a dollop onto his left ring finger. He began to twist his gold wedding band. My mother made a small, high-pitched noise. "David, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He worked the ring over his knuckle. It was tight. He had worn that ring for 42 years. His hands were swollen with arthritis. He grimaced in pain, pulling and twisting. Finally, it slid off. He held the gold band in his fingers. It was shiny and wet with soap. He walked back to the table. He stopped in front of Jacob's ruined painting. The puddle of wine was still there, dark and sticky. My father dropped the ring, plink. It landed right in the center of the wine puddle. It didn't splash. It just sank, surrounded by the red stain on the white paper. He looked up. He looked directly at my mother. His eyes were not angry. They were incredibly sad. They looked like a building that had finally collapsed after years of rotting from the inside. "I am done," he said. His voice was rough like gravel. "David, please," my mother whispered. She was trembling. "It's just a little fight. The girls are just upset." "No, Susan," my father said. "It's not a fight. It's a sickness." He looked at Jessica. For the first time in his life, he didn't look at her with pity or patience. He looked at her with disgust. "I have worked for 50 years," he said. "I broke my back. I worked weekends. I missed birthdays. I did it to provide for this family. I thought I was protecting you." He shook his head slowly. "I wasn't protecting you," he said. "I was funding you." Jessica scoffed, trying to regain control. "Oh, here we go, the martyr speech. Give it a rest, Dad." "Quiet," my father said. He didn't yell it, but the command was so absolute that Jessica actually shut her mouth. "I watched you hurt that boy today," my father said to her. "I watched you enjoy it. And I watched your mother help you cover it up." He pointed a shaking finger at the ring sitting in the wine. "I took a vow," he said to my mother, "to love and to cherish. But you made me take a different vow. You made me vow to protect Jessica from the consequences of her own actions. We have sacrificed our retirement. We have sacrificed our reputation. We have sacrificed our relationship with our other daughter." He looked at me then. His eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry," he said to me. It was the first time my father had ever apologized to me. "I failed you. I let them treat you like a spare part." He turned back to my mother. "I am done protecting you, Susan. And I am certainly done paying for her." He jerked his head toward Jessica. "What does that mean?" Jessica demanded. Her voice was starting to sound shrill. She sensed the danger now. "What do you mean paying?" My father reached under the table and pulled out his black leather satchel. He unzipped it. The sound of the zipper was loud in the room. He pulled out a black ledger. It was an old-fashioned accounting book. I recognized it. It was the book he used to track his construction jobs. "I brought this because I wanted to talk about the will today," my father said. "I wanted to talk about the future. But now I think we need to talk about the past." He opened the book. The pages were covered in his neat, small handwriting, columns of numbers, dates, notes. "I kept track," he said. "Every time you asked for money, Susan. Every loan, every emergency. Every time Jessica needed bailing out." He looked at Jessica. "You think you're a victim," he said. "You think the world is hard on you, but the truth is you have never lived in the world. You have lived in a fantasy land that I paid for." He slammed his hand down on the open book. "The fantasy is over." The sound of my father dropping his wedding ring into the puddle of wine echoed in my ears. Plink. That small sound had shattered 40 years of silence. I was standing now. I had stood up moments before, confronting Jessica, and now I stood frozen, watching my father. He looked older than I had ever seen him, but he also looked stronger. He looked like a mountain that had finally decided to stop letting people climb all over it. He reached under the table. His movements were slow and stiff. We all watched him. My mother, Susan, was wiping her eyes with a napkin, mumbling, "David, don't do this. Not today, it's your birthday." "It is my birthday," my father said. His voice was gravel. "And for my birthday, I am giving myself the truth." He pulled out a black leather satchel. It was worn at the corners. I knew that bag. He took it to every job site. He kept his blueprints and his contracts in there. He placed it on the table, right next to the ruined painting. The zipper was loud in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out a book. It wasn't a digital tablet or a phone. It was an old-fashioned black ledger with a hard cover and red corners. The kind accountants used 30 years ago. He opened it. The spine cracked. "I have been keeping this book for 22 years, my father said. He didn't look up. He ran his thick, calloused finger down the first page. "I started it the year Jessica dropped out of college the first time." Jessica scoffed. She crossed her arms, trying to look bored. "Oh great, the book of Dad's grievances. Are we going to hear about how much my braces cost again?" "No," my father said. "Braces are for children, this book is for adults." He looked at my mother. "Susan, you told me the money for the new roof on the cabin in 2015 cost $12,000. My mother froze. She stopped wiping her eyes. I don't remember the exact amount, David, that was years ago." "I do," my father said, "because I called the roofer last week. The roof cost $6,000. You wrote a check for 12. He looked at Jessica. "Where did the other $6,000 go, Jessica?" Jessica rolled her eyes. "How should I know? Maybe Mom bought groceries." "August 14th, 2015, my father read from the book. "Check number 402, cashed by Jessica Miller, $6,000. He looked up. His eyes were cold blue steel. "You told us you needed it for a business investment," my father said. "You said you were starting a jewelry line. We never saw any jewelry. We never saw the money again." "It failed," Jessica snapped. "Businesses fail, Dad. You should support my dreams." "I supported your vacation to Cabo," my father corrected her. "That's where you went. I saw the photos on Facebook. You thought I didn't know how to use the computer. You were wrong." He turned the page. The paper made a crisp, dry sound. 2018, he read. "Mom said she needed $4,000 for dental surgery. She didn't have surgery. You had a credit card bill from Nordstrom." 2019, he continued. "Mom withdrew $5,000 from the emergency fund. She said the car transmission died. The car was fine. You needed a deposit for a new apartment because you got evicted." The room was getting smaller. The air was getting thin. I watched my mother. She was shrinking into her chair. She wasn't looking at Dad. She was looking at the tablecloth, her face pale and patchy. She had been lying to him for decades. She had been siphoning off their life savings to fund Jessica's lifestyle, and she had lied to his face every single time. I looked at the ledger. It was thick. There were hundreds of pages. "I tracked it all," my father said. "Every lie, every stolen dollar. I wrote it down. I don't know why. Maybe I was waiting for you to stop. Maybe I was waiting for Susan to tell me the truth." He looked at my mother with profound disappointment. "You never did," he whispered. "You just got better at lying." "I did it for her," my mother cried out. "She needed help, David. She's not strong like you and your other daughter. She needs help." "She needs a job," my father said, "and she needs to grow up." "Is that it?" Jessica yelled. She stood up, slamming her hands on the table. The wine glasses rattled. "You kept a stupid book, so what? I borrowed some money. I'll pay it back when I make it big. You're so petty." "Sit down," my father said. "No," Jessica screamed. "I'm leaving. You're ruining everything." "I said sit down," my father roared. I had never heard him yell like that. It was a command that shook the walls. Jessica sat down. She looked genuinely frightened for the first time. "I haven't got to the last entry," my father said. His voice dropped low again. It was shaking now. "The entry from 3 years ago." The room went dead silent. Even the rain seemed to stop. I saw my mother's eyes go wide. She shook her head frantically at him. "David, no, please, not that, you promised." "I promised to protect the family," my father said. "But you two are not the family anymore. You are the cancer eating it alive." He looked at me. "Do you remember when Jessica went to study art in Europe for 6 months 3 years ago?" I nodded. "Yes, we threw her a going-away party." "She didn't go to Europe," my father said. He turned the ledger to the last page. He pointed to a figure circled in red ink. $174,000. I gasped. Dad, what is that? That is the price of a hush money settlement, my father said. Jessica was white as a sheet. She looked like she was going to be sick. She was drunk, my father said, speaking to me but looking at Jessica. It was 2 a.m. She was driving your mother's car. She hit a parked car. And she hit the person getting out of it. My hand flew to my mouth. Oh my God. He lived, my father said. Broken leg, concussion. But he was going to press charges. It was a felony DUI. She would have gone to prison. He looked at my mother. Susan emptied the retirement account. She cashed out her IRA. She took a second mortgage on this cabin. She paid the man and his lawyer to settle out of court and sign a non-disclosure agreement. She paid to make the police report disappear. I stared at my sister. She wasn't just a bully. She was a criminal. She had almost killed someone, and my parents had paid nearly $200,000 to cover it up. And you know what the worst part is? My father asked. He looked defeated. She didn't even say thank you. She didn't stop drinking. She didn't get a job. She just complained that she couldn't go to Europe. He closed the ledger, thump. The golden child, my father said bitterly. She isn't gold. She is just expensive. The silence after the revelation was heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mother was sobbing quietly into her hands. Jessica was staring at the table, her face a mask of shock and defiance. I looked at Jacob. He was still watching the adults, his eyes wide. He didn't understand the money, but he understood the tone. He knew the dynamic had shifted. The scary aunt wasn't scary anymore. She was just in trouble. My father stood up straighter. He took a deep breath, and I saw the resolve harden in his face. He picked up his phone from the table. What are you doing? Jessica asked. Her voice was small now. I am finishing this, he said. He dialed a number. He put it on speaker. First National Bank, how may I help you? The automated voice chirped. Connect me to fraud services, my father said clearly. David, my mother shrieked. Stop. What are you doing? I am reporting the cards stolen, my father said calmly. Because they were, you gave her my card, Susan. I didn't authorize that. He looked at Jessica. And I am freezing the joint accounts. Jessica scrambled for her purse. She pulled out her phone. She started tapping furiously. You can't do that, she yelled. I have bills. I have rent due next week. Not my problem, my father said. Declined, Jessica whispered, staring at her screen. She looked up at him with pure hatred. You cut me off. You actually cut me off. I should have done it 20 years ago, he said. He hung up the phone. He looked at the two of them, his wife and his daughter. This cabin is in my name, he said. My father built it. I maintain it. He looked at his watch. It is 4:45 p.m. You have 1 hour. 1 hour for what? My mother asked, her voice trembling. To pack, my father said. And to get out. David, you can't be serious, my mother pleaded. She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. It's raining. Where will we go? Jessica's apartment is. Well, she's behind on rent. She can't go there. Then she can go to a shelter, my father said. Or she can go to a friend, or she can go to hell, I don't care. And me, my mother whispered. I'm your wife. You haven't been my wife for a long time, he said sadly. You've been her accomplice. You chose her, Susan. You chose her over me. You chose her over our other daughter. You chose her over our grandson. He pointed to Jacob's ruined painting. You watched her hurt that boy, and you handed her a napkin. You are just as guilty. My father walked over to the door. He opened it wide. The sound of the rain was loud. It was a storm now, hammering against the roof, washing the world clean. The wind blew in, cold and fresh, smelling of wet pine needles and mud. I am staying here with my daughter and my grandson, my father said. We are going to have a birthday dinner without you. Jessica stood up. She grabbed her purse. She looked like a cornered animal. Fine, she screamed. I don't want to be here anyway. You're all boring and miserable. I hate this place. She marched toward the door. As she passed me, she sneered. I hope you're happy. You finally stole Daddy. I looked her right in the eye. I didn't flinch. I didn't steal him, I said quietly. You lost him. She stomped out into the rain. We heard her car door slam. My mother stood up slowly. She looked at the open door, then back at my father. She was waiting for him to crack. She was waiting for him to say, just kidding, stay, let's fix this. He didn't. He stood by the door, holding it open, looking at her with a face of stone. David, she started. Go, he said. She grabbed her coat. She grabbed her purse. She walked out the door, sobbing. My father watched them go. He watched until the taillights of my mother's car disappeared down the long, muddy driveway. Then, and only then, did he close the door. He locked the deadbolt. Click, he turned around. The room was quiet. The tension that had filled the house for as long as I could remember was gone. It had walked out the door with them. He walked back to the table. He looked at me. Then he looked at Jacob. Jacob was looking at him with awe. "Grandpa," Jacob asked, "are the bad people gone?" My father's face crumbled. He knelt down on the hard floor. He ignored his bad knees. He pulled Jacob into a hug. It was a desperate, fierce hug. "Yes, buddy," my father choked out, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "The bad people are gone, and they are never coming back." I walked over and wrapped my arms around both of them. We stood there in the kitchen, the three of us, holding onto each other while the storm raged outside. We were smaller in number, but for the first time in my life, we were safe. The silence in the cabin that night was different. It wasn't the tense silence of walking on eggshells. It was the peaceful silence of safety. We cooked hot dogs because the roast beef seemed like part of the old life. We laughed. My father showed Jacob how to make a fire in the fireplace. But while we were safe, the storm for Jessica was just beginning. I found out later what happened that night. Small towns talk, and my sister had never been subtle. She had driven to the nearest gas station. She tried to fill up the tank. The pump declined her card. She tried another card, declined. She went inside and tried to buy a bottle of vodka and a pack of cigarettes. She screamed at the teenage cashier when the card reader beeped that angry rejection noise. She threw the bottle on the floor. The police were called. It wasn't the state troopers who knew my dad. It was a new deputy. He didn't know who she was, and he didn't care. He saw a 40-year-old woman screaming in a gas station, smelling like wine, with a suspended license in the system. She called my mother, of course. My mother was sitting in a motel room 10 miles away, staring at the wall. My mother tried to transfer money. She couldn't. The accounts were frozen. For the first time in her life, Jessica called for help, and the line was dead. Her power had never been real. It was rented. It was leased on my father's credit and my mother's guilt. She walked around like a queen, treating people like dirt, because she had a safety net woven out of money she didn't earn. Now the net was gone, and she was hitting the concrete. She spent the night in a holding cell. No one bailaid her out. My father turned his phone off. I blocked her number. The next morning, the reality set in. She had no apartment. She hadn't paid rent in 3 months, and without Dad's emergency checks, the landlord began eviction proceedings immediately. She had no car. My father reported it as unauthorized use, and since the title was in his name, the police impounded it. She was stripped bare. I saw her a week later. I was in town picking up groceries with Dad. We were stopped at a red light. I saw a woman walking on the sidewalk. She was wearing expensive boots, but they were scuffed and muddy. She was dragging a suitcase with a broken wheel. It was Jessica. She looked tired. She looked old. The arrogance was gone from her posture. She wasn't strutting. She was trudging. She looked up and saw us. Our eyes met through the glass. I waited for the finger. I waited for the scream. She just looked at me. Her eyes were empty. She looked away and kept walking. She was just a person now. Just a regular, struggling person who had burned every bridge she had ever crossed. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt nothing. The fear was gone. She couldn't hurt me anymore. She was just a ghost of a childhood I was finally leaving behind. It is amazing how much life can change in 6 months when you cut out the infection. I moved into the cabin with Dad for the summer. It was supposed to be temporary, but it felt right. We spent the days fixing up the place. We replaced the roof, and this time we paid the roofer directly. Jacob blossomed. That is the only word for it. He used to be a shy kid. He used to apologize if he spilled water. He used to ask permission to speak. Now he was loud. He ran through the woods with a stick, pretending to be an explorer. He tracked mud into the kitchen, and my father just laughed and handed him a broom. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making lemonade. I looked out the big window. My father was sitting on the porch bench. Jacob was sitting next to him. Dad had bought him a real easel and a set of professional acrylic paints. "No watercolors," Dad had said. "We want something that lasts." They were painting the lake. My father, with his big, arthritic hands, was showing Jacob how to blend the green of the trees into the blue of the water. Jacob made a mistake. His brush slipped and he made a big black smudge in the middle of the sky. I held my breath. Old habits die hard. My muscles tensed, waiting for the criticism. Jacob looked at the smudge. Then he looked at his grandpa. "Oops," Jacob said. My father didn't yell. He didn't sigh. He didn't grab a napkin. "That's not a mistake," my father said softly. That's a storm cloud, see. If you add a little gray here, it looks like rain coming in. Jacob smiled. He dipped his brush in the gray. Yeah, a big storm. Exactly, Dad said. You can fix anything on a canvas, Jacob. You just have to keep painting. I put the lemonade pitcher down. I had to lean against the counter because my legs felt weak. I was watching my son heal. And I was watching my father heal, too. He was being the father to Jacob that he hadn't been able to be for me because he had been too busy managing the chaos of Jessica. He was finally free to be a good man. We had built a home with no predators. There were no hidden agendas. There were no sudden explosions. There was only the smell of pine, the sound of the lake, and the safety of people who actually loved each other. The letters started coming a month after the birthday incident, as we called it. My mother wrote them. They were long, rambling letters on floral stationery. She wrote from a small condo she had rented in the city. She was working part-time as a receptionist. It was the first time she had worked in 30 years. The letters were full of guilt. We're family. You can't just throw us away. Jessica is really trying. She's working at a mall kiosk now. She's humbled, please, David. She never apologized. She never said, I was wrong to lie. She only said, I want things back to the way they were. She wanted the comfort of her denial back. She wanted us to come back and play our roles so she could pretend everything was fine. I didn't read them. My father read the first one, then he bought a shredder. Every time a letter with that floral scent arrived, he didn't even open it. We're into the machine. Aren't you curious? I asked him once. No, he said. I know what it says. It says she hasn't changed. He was right. We heard about Jessica through the grapevine. She lost the mall job. She moved in with a boyfriend, then got kicked out. She was bouncing around, living the hard life she had created for herself. I hoped, in a small way, that she would find rock bottom. I hoped she would get sober. I hoped she would become a decent person, but I wasn't waiting for it anymore. Her journey was hers. My journey was here. One evening in late autumn, we were having a bonfire. The air was crisp. We were roasting marshmallows. Jacob was sitting on a log, sticky and happy. Mom, he asked. Yeah, bud. Are we going to see Aunt Jess for Christmas? I looked at my father. The firelight danced on his face. He looked at peace. No, Jacob, I said clearly. We aren't? Okay, Jacob said, shrugging. Good, she wasn't very nice. No, she wasn't, I said, and we don't have to be around people who aren't nice, not ever again. I looked up at the stars. They were bright and clear above the trees. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who hid in the bathroom, the one who bit her lip until it bled, the one who apologized for taking up space. She was gone. She had burned up in the fire of that dining room argument. In her place was a woman who knew her worth. A woman who knew that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. It's about safety. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. This peace cost us dearly. It cost us a mother and a sister. It cost us the illusion of a happy family history. But looking at my son's smiling face, illuminated by the fire, I knew the truth. It was worth every flame we walked through. If loving them required losing myself, letting go was survival. And we had survived.